Good morning. My name is Lucy Michael and I'm the author of the latest Northern Ireland Life and Times Survey Research Update. This one on attitudes to migrant workers. Thank you for joining me this morning. I want to go through some of the key findings with you and we hope that we'll be able to answer your questions in a webinar in the near future. The Northern Ireland Life and Times Survey attention on migrant workers is warranted because it's this group that makes up the majority of immigrants to the region rather than students, asylum seekers or any other group. Also, we can see from research across Europe that attitudes to migrant workers are markedly different to those to, say, refugees, driven in part by the politics of the so-called refugee crisis in Europe. In 2012, at the previous asking of the questions on immigration, 45% of people asked wanted a reduction in immigration to Northern Ireland, even though Northern Ireland had the lowest immigration of the UK regions at that time. By 2018, that had fallen to just 21%, 45% wanting a reduction to 21%, and that fall is reflected across all of the communities of Northern Ireland. It's a significant finding for this survey. Let me dig into that a little deeper. This positive outlook from Northern Ireland can be explained in a few ways. Firstly, despite the impression that there's a hardening of attitudes internationally towards immigration, actually attitudes in European countries like Spain, Portugal, Norway, the UK and Ireland to migrant workers have becoming considerably more favourable. There's also the departure of the UK from the European Union, Brexit, which prompted both an increase in hate crime and a concern about jobs and rights amongst EU migrants, and a decreased immigration for that group fairly quickly after the referendum. By 2018, when Brexit's consequences had become more clear, Northern Ireland was experiencing a significant increase in return migration amongst EU nationals to other countries. More than a quarter of EU nationals working in Northern Ireland left between 2016 and 2018. Health and social care and hospitality sectors all struggled to replace lost staff. The Northern Ireland Life and Times survey asked specifically about jobs in the labour market. In 2018, 72% of people asked said they agreed or strongly agreed that migrant workers were generally good for Northern Ireland's economy. Since 2008, there has been a consistently positive trajectory on this question. What's noticeable now is the upward trajectory for those strongly agreeing since 2016. Doubling amongst Catholics, who'd always been a bit more positive, and quadrupling amongst Protestants, since they'd previously demonstrated much lower rates. There's a corresponding decrease for the idea that migrant workers take jobs away from those born in Northern Ireland. Support for this idea was falling from 2008, and by 2018, 59% of people asked disagreed. There's also matched by the support for the idea that migrant workers take up jobs that Northern Ireland workers don't want. 73% agreed with this position. Jobs in the health sector are particularly interesting. Although there's been support for migrant health professionals to fill gaps in this sector, and that was slowly growing from 2008 to 2016, actually there's a significant change from that point on. Those agreeing with the need for migrant health professionals rose from 82% to 93%, and those strongly agreeing doubled from 26% to 54%. Again, support amongst Protestants grew from a low base, but at a remarkable pace. Turning then to attitudes based on access to key services, the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey investigated concerns about the impact of immigration on health services, housing and education. Fewer people in 2018 were concerned about the impact of migrant worker numbers on health service. There we see a general fall of around 10% in those believing that they cause a strain in the health service. People over 45 were more likely to believe this. Housing was far less of a concern than a decade ago. Again, we see a fall of around 11% in those believing migrant worker numbers caused a shortage of local housing. Those aged 45 to 54 years old were much more likely to agree than other groups. In fact, those most likely to be in the age categories looking for their first home or to buy or to rent were more likely to disagree. There were smaller change in attitudes around education. People over 65 were more likely to believe migrant workers caused a strain on schools than younger groups, including those most likely to be parents of school children. Protestants were still more likely than Catholics or people declaring no religion to believe that migrant worker numbers caused a strain on the health service, housing or education, but that is explained by the negative attitude to immigration observed across all questions by this group since 2008. In fact, this group is demonstrating the same rate of improvement on attitudes as other groups, and in some cases at a much faster pace. There is a more positive attitude across all groups evident in responses to the statement that migrant workers come to Northern Ireland just to get social security benefits. Here we see a drop of about 10% for this statement across all groups. There's also a rise in the number of people who believe that people's perceptions of migrant workers are tainted by the media. 2/3 of people now believe in this media effect. There's also very high support for the idea that migrant workers make Northern Ireland open to new ideas and cultures. Overall agreement in 2018 was 81%, but 31% strongly agreed. Agreement was almost equally high amongst Catholics and Protestants. Overall, we can be confident that we're seeing a solidly positive trajectory in attitudes to migrant workers in Northern Ireland. The consequences of Brexit for the region are reflected in the numbers concerned about labour shortages too. The rapid pace of improvement in Protestant attitudes, closing the gap between attitudes and immigration in Protestant and Catholic communities, is positive and promising. There is some polarisation evident in the results, with a small number displaying a consistent and extreme anti-immigrant sentiment, around 6%, across all questions on migrant workers. This has to be watched carefully, although it's not a cause of immediate alarm. It does reflect the polarisation of opinion captured in surveys across Europe, and it warrants some strengthening of our resilience against extreme politics and violence. Overall, this morning, I want to leave you with a really positive message from the 2018 Northern Ireland Life and Times survey. Attitudes to migrant workers are improving across all questions, across all groups, and I think that's something that we can be very confident about seeing continue in the near future. Thank you for being with me this morning. I very much hope you enjoy the latest research update, and I look forward to hearing from you with your questions and comments. Take care.